The sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the rugged Nevada landscape in hues of amber and gold as Virginia Gardner stood at the edge of Hamilton, clutching a crumpled letter that had brought her west to a town where no one knew her name or the secrets she carried. The year was 1876, and the promise of a new beginning had drawn her from Boston to this dusty frontier town, where the railroad had only recently connected the isolated community to the rest of the rapidly expanding nation. Virginia Ginny, to those who'd known her back east, pulled her shawl tighter against the evening chill as she surveyed the main street with its weathered wooden buildings. Her once fine traveling dress was now coated with the dust of a journey that had taken everything she had, both in spirit and in funds. The stagecoach had departed, leaving her alone with her single trunk and the growing realization that her cousin's invitation to join her in Hamilton might have been made in haste, for there was no one waiting to greet her. "Madam, you look like you might be needing some assistance." The voice was deep and melodious, with a slight drawl that marked the speaker as not native to Nevada. Virginia turned to find herself looking up at a tall man astride a chestnut stallion. The setting sun silhouetted him, obscuring his features except for the unmistakable outline of a wide-brimmed hat and broad shoulders. A cowboy, one of many in these parts, but there was something in his posture that spoke of confidence without arrogance. "I'm fine, thank you," she replied automatically, the polite response ingrained by years of proper Boston upbringing. But as he dismounted and stepped into the light cast by the newly lit street lamps, Virginia found herself revising her assessment. He wasn't merely a cowboy. There was a refinement to him that seemed at odds with his rugged appearance. "Matthew Jenkins," he introduced himself, touching the brim of his hat. His eyes, a startling blue against his sun-darkened skin, assessed her with concern. "And forgive me for saying so, but you don't look fine. This your first time in Hamilton?" Virginia hesitated, weighing her options. Her cousin's house was supposedly at the north end of town, but darkness was falling quickly, and she was unfamiliar with her surroundings. Pride warred with practicality. "Yes," she admitted finally. "I'm Virginia Gardner. I've come to stay with my cousin, Elizabeth Warren. Her home is supposed to be on Aspen Street." Matthew Jenkins' expression shifted slightly. "Miss Warren, I'm afraid she's not in Hamilton anymore. Sold her place about 2 months back and moved to Sacramento with her new husband. Didn't she write to tell you?" The news hit Virginia like a physical blow. She'd been counting on Elizabeth's support, both for lodging and to help her secure a position as a teacher in the local school. The letter in her hand, dated 3 months prior, suddenly felt like a cruel joke. "I see," she managed, her voice admirably steady despite the panic rising within her. "I suppose the letter must have crossed in the mail with her departure. How unfortunate." Matthew studied her face, seeing more than Virginia would have liked. "You've nowhere to go tonight, have you?" "I'll find accommodations," she said firmly, glancing down the street toward what appeared to be a hotel. "I'm sure there must be a respectable establishment where a lady might stay." "The Hamilton Hotel's full up with railroad men," Matthew replied. "And the only other option is Mrs. Holloway's boarding house, but she doesn't take guests after sundown, strict rule of hers." He paused, seeming to consider something. "My sister runs a small ranch just outside of town. She'd be happy to put you up until you can sort things out." Virginia stiffened. "I couldn't possibly impose on strangers. It's no imposition. Sarah's always complaining about having too few women to talk to out here." His smile was genuine, reaching his eyes in a way that momentarily disarmed her. "And it's getting dark. Hamilton's mostly peaceful, but it's no place for a lady alone at night, especially one new to town." Virginia knew he was right, but accepting help from a man she just met went against everything she'd been taught. Yet her alternatives were rapidly dwindling with the fading light. "Your sister wouldn't mind. Not in the least. She'll be delighted for the company." Matthew moved to lift her trunk, hefting it with ease onto his horse. "We can strap this to Renegade here, and if you don't mind riding double, we'll have you at the Circle J in no time." Virginia had never ridden double with a man who wasn't family, and even then, not since childhood. But necessity overrode propriety. With as much dignity as she could muster, she allowed Matthew to help her onto his horse before he swung up behind her, keeping a respectful distance despite the confined space. As they rode out of Hamilton, Virginia clutched the saddle horn tightly, acutely aware of the man whose arms encircled her just enough to hold the reins. The rhythm of the horse beneath them and the vast openness of the Nevada night sky gradually calmed her frayed nerves. "May I ask what brings you to Hamilton, Miss Gardner?" Matthew's voice was close to her ear, but not uncomfortably so. "I'm a teacher," she replied, offering the simplest truth. "Or at least I was in Boston. I'd hoped to secure a position at the school here. We could use a good teacher." The last one left when she married a silver miner from Virginia City. There was a note of approval in his voice. "Teaching's a noble profession." Virginia didn't respond immediately. Teaching had been her salvation back east, a respectable way to support herself after circumstances had left her with few options. But it wasn't the only reason she'd fled to the West. "It's honest work," she finally said. They rode in companionable silence for a time, the only sounds the steady clip-clop of Renegade's hooves and the occasional call of a night bird. The moon rose higher, illuminating the landscape in silver light that transformed the harsh terrain into something almost magical. "It's beautiful," Virginia murmured, more to herself than to her companion. "Nevada grows on you," Matthew replied. "It's not as green as other places, but there's a stark honesty to it. What you see is what you get out here." The double meaning wasn't lost on Virginia. The West was known for its straightforward nature, both the land and its people. It was part of what had drawn her here, the hope that she could leave behind the suffocating constraints of Boston society and the whispers that had followed her after the scandal. The Circle J Ranch appeared before them, a modest but well-maintained homestead with a main house, barn, and several outbuildings. Lantern lights spilled from the windows, creating a welcoming glow in the darkness. As they approached, the front door opened and a woman emerged onto the porch. Even from a distance, Virginia could see the family resemblance, the same tall stature and confident bearing that characterized Matthew. "Matt, you're back early," the woman called, then paused as she noticed Virginia. "And you've brought company." Matthew dismounted first, then helped Virginia down with strong, steady hands. "Sarah, this is Miss Virginia Gardner. She arrived in Hamilton today, only to find her cousins moved on to Sacramento. Miss Gardner, my sister, Sarah Jenkins Campbell." Sarah's welcoming smile was as genuine as her brother's had been. "Well, isn't that just like Elizabeth Warren? Always in such a hurry. Come inside, Miss Gardner. You must be exhausted." Virginia followed Sarah into the house, where the aroma of freshly baked bread and beef stew filled the air. The interior was modest but comfortable, with handmade furniture and touches of femininity in the curtains and quilts that softened the rustic setting. "My husband's on a cattle drive to Reno," Sarah explained as she bustled about, setting an extra place at the table. "Won't be back for another week, so you're welcome to use his study. It has a daybed that's quite comfortable." "You're very kind," Virginia said, feeling overwhelmed by the genuine hospitality. "I don't want to be a burden." "Nonsense. We help each other out here, it's the way of things." Sarah ladled stew into bowls while Matthew brought in Virginia's trunk. Matt, wash up and join us. Miss Gardner must be starving after her journey." During the simple but delicious meal, Virginia learned that the Circle J Ranch had belonged to Matthew and Sarah's parents, who had been among the first settlers in the area. After their passing 3 years earlier, Matthew had taken over the ranching operations while Sarah had married David Campbell, a neighboring rancher. Their properties adjoined, making it practical for the siblings to work together. "Matt's the real cattleman," Sarah said with obvious pride. "He has a way with the animals that even David admits is special." Matthew shrugged off the praise. "I just understand them. They're straightforward creatures, no pretense." "Unlike people," Virginia found herself asking. His blue eyes met hers across the table. "Some people, not all." There was something in his gaze that made Virginia look away first. It was as if he could see beyond her carefully constructed facade to the vulnerable woman beneath. It was disconcerting but not entirely unwelcome. After dinner, Sarah showed Virginia to the study where she'd prepared the dabed with fresh linens. "There's water in the pitcher if you'd like to wash up. Breakfast is at sunrise. We keep early hours on the ranch." "Thank you again," Virginia said sincerely. "I can't tell you how much I appreciate your kindness to a stranger." Sarah paused at the door. "Matt's a good judge of character. If he thought you needed help, then you did. Rest now. Tomorrow we'll figure out what's next for you." Left alone, Virginia unpacked only what she needed for the night. As she prepared for bed, she caught a glimpse of herself in the small mirror above the wash basin. Her normally lustrous auburn hair was limp from travel, and shadows underscored her hazel eyes. The elegant beauty that had once been her pride now seemed faded, worn away by grief and hardship. "You're a long way from Boston, Jenny," she whispered to her reflection, using the childhood nickname no one in Nevada would ever know her by. She touched the scar along her jawline, barely visible now, but a permanent reminder of what she'd left behind. Outside her window, she could hear Matthew's deep voice as he spoke to someone in the yard, probably tending to the horses before retiring. There was a steadiness to him that reminded her of her father before illness and financial ruin had broken him. It was a steadiness she'd learned not to trust in men, for it could mask darker tendencies. Yet as she lay down on the surprisingly comfortable dabed, Virginia felt safer than she had in months. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, finding lodging, securing employment, establishing herself in this frontier community. But tonight, at least, she had found shelter and kindness among strangers who asked for nothing in return. Sleep came swiftly, and for once, the nightmares that had plagued her since Boston stayed at bay. Virginia woke to the sounds of a working ranch rooster's crowing, cattle lowing in the distance, and the clatter of cookware as Sarah prepared breakfast. For a moment, disoriented, she forgot where she was. Then reality returned, along with the memory of Matthew Jenkins' kindness the previous evening. She dressed quickly in one of her simpler gowns, arranging her hair in a practical chignon. The mirror reflected a composed woman, ready to face whatever the day might bring, though her eyes betrayed her uncertainty. When she entered the kitchen, she found Sarah at the stove and Matthew already seated at the table, studying what appeared to be a ledger book. Both looked up at her entrance. "Good morning, Miss Gardner," Matthew said, rising politely. "I trust you slept well." "Very well, thank you. Your home is most comfortable." Sarah gestured for her to sit. "Coffee's hot and the flapjacks are just about ready. Matt's been telling me that you're a teacher." Virginia accepted the steaming cup gratefully. "Yes, I taught at a girls' school in Boston for 5 years." "Well, that's providential," Sarah said, placing a plate of flapjacks before her. "Hamilton's been without a teacher since Miss Peterson left." The school board's been desperate to find someone before the new term starts next month. Hope flickered within Virginia. Do you think they might consider me? Without references at hand, Matthew looked up from his ledger. Sarah's on the school board, and I'm acquainted with the other members. If you're interested, I'd be happy to take you into town today to meet with Mayor Wilson. He chairs the board. That would be wonderful, Virginia said, unable to hide her relief. A teaching position would provide both income and respectability, two things she desperately needed. Matt can show you around Hamilton properly while he's at it, Sarah added. It's not Boston, but it has its charms, and we need to find you suitable lodging. Mrs. Holloway's boarding house is the obvious choice, but there might be other options. As they ate, the siblings discussed the day's plans. Matthew needed to check on a shipment at the general store and meet with the blacksmith, while Sarah would remain at the ranch to oversee the repair of the north fence. It was decided that Virginia would accompany Matthew to town, where he would introduce her to key members of the community. After breakfast, as Sarah packed a lunch for them to take, Matthew led Virginia to the barn where he saddled Renegade and a gentle mare named Daisy. "Can you ride, Miss Gardner?" he asked, adjusting the mare's stirrups. "Yes, though it's been some time," Virginia admitted. She'd learned as a girl during summers at her grandfather's country estate, but those days of privilege seemed like another lifetime now. Daisy's even tempered. "She'll take good care of you." With Matthew's assistance, Virginia mounted the mare, arranging her skirts as modestly as possible. Her riding habit had been among the possessions she'd had to sell to finance her journey west, so she had to make do with her day dress, which thankfully had a full enough skirt to drape adequately. They set off for Hamilton as the morning sun climbed higher in the cloudless sky. The landscape looked different in daylight, less mysterious, but no less beautiful. Virginia found herself appreciating the rugged beauty of the Nevada wilderness, so unlike the manicured gardens and orderly streets of Boston. Matthew proved to be a knowledgeable guide, pointing out landmarks and sharing the history of the area. He spoke of the indigenous Paiute people who had first inhabited the land, the silver strikes that had brought the first wave of settlers, and the railroad that had transformed Hamilton from an isolated outpost to a growing community. "The town's changing," he remarked as they rode. "Some folks welcome it, others resist. Progress is inevitable, I suppose, but there's value in preserving certain ways of life." "You sound torn about it yourself," Virginia observed. Matthew's smile was thoughtful. "I appreciate the conveniences the railroad brings: supplies, mail, new ideas. But I've seen what happens to land and people when profit becomes the only consideration. There's a balance to be struck." Virginia had never heard a man speak so openly about such matters to a woman. In Boston, men discussed business and politics among themselves, considering such topics unsuitable for feminine ears. Matthew's willingness to engage with her as an intellectual equal was refreshing. They reached Hamilton by mid-morning. In daylight, the town revealed itself as a growing frontier settlement, not as rough as some mining camps, but not as refined as the eastern cities Virginia knew. The main street boasted a bank, general store, hotel, 2 saloons, and various other businesses necessary for a functioning community. Matthew guided her first to the mayor's office, a modest building adjacent to the town hall. Mayor Wilson, a portly man with impressive mutton chop whiskers, greeted Matthew warmly and Virginia with curious interest. "A teacher from Boston." "Well, that's a stroke of good fortune for Hamilton," he declared after introductions were made. "Our school's been sitting empty since June, and parents are growing restless about their children's education." "I would be most grateful for the opportunity," Virginia said. I have experience with students of all ages and am comfortable with a diverse classroom." Mayor Wilson nodded approvingly. "The position pays $30 a month. With lodging included, there's a small cottage behind the schoolhouse. It's nothing fancy, mind you, but it's private and respectable for a lady teacher." The salary was less than she'd earned in Boston, but the inclusion of housing made it a reasonable offer. More importantly, it would give her independence a place of her own where she could establish herself in this new community. "When could I begin?" she asked, trying to contain her eagerness. "Well, term doesn't start until September 4th, but the cottage could use a good cleaning, and you might want to familiarize yourself with our curriculum such as it is." The mayor stroked his whiskers thoughtfully. "I see no reason why you couldn't move in immediately and spend the next few weeks preparing. The board would need to formally approve your appointment, of course, but with our situation being urgent and you being qualified, I foresee no objections." Matthew, who had remained quietly supportive during the discussion, spoke up. "Miss Gardner's trunk is at the Circle J. I'd be happy to bring it to the teacher's cottage later today if that suits." "That would be very kind, Mr. Jenkins," Virginia said, feeling a complex mixture of gratitude and a strange reluctance to end their association so quickly. Mayor Wilson beamed. "Excellent. Let me show you to the school and cottage so you can see what you're getting yourself into." The schoolhouse was a simple one-room building with rows of wooden desks, a potbelly stove for heating, and a teacher's desk on a raised platform. Though dusty from disuse, it was well constructed and boasted large windows that flooded the room with natural light. The teacher's cottage behind it was equally modest, a single main room that served as parlor and kitchen, with a small bedroom and storage area. It was sparsely furnished with essentials: a bed, table, chairs, cookstove, and shelves. What it lacked in luxury, it made up for in privacy and proximity to her workplace. "It's perfect," Virginia declared, and she meant it. After the crowded boarding house in Boston and months of uncertainty, the little cottage represented security and a fresh start. "It needs a woman's touch," Matthew observed, "but it's sound. Roof doesn't leak and the stove draws well. I helped install it last winter." Mayor Wilson handed Virginia a key. "It's yours, Miss Gardner. Welcome to Hamilton. I'll call a school board meeting for tomorrow evening to formalize your appointment." After the mayor departed, Virginia stood in the center of what would be her new home, overwhelmed by how quickly her fortunes had changed. Just 24 hours ago, she'd arrived in town with no prospects. Now she had a position and a home. "Thank you," she said quietly to Matthew. "Without your intervention, I might still be standing at the stagecoach stop wondering what to do next. I only introduced you. You secured the position on your own merits." His blue eyes regarded her with something that might have been admiration. "You've got grit, Miss Gardner. That'll serve you well out here." Virginia wasn't accustomed to such direct compliments, especially from a man she barely knew. In Boston, flattery was an art form, calculated and often insincere. Matthew's straightforward praise left her momentarily speechless. "I'll bring your trunk by later this afternoon," he continued, seemingly unaware of her discomfort. "In the meantime, would you allow me to show you around Hamilton? You should know where to find necessities." The invitation was practical, not social, Virginia reminded herself. "I would appreciate that very much." They spent the next hour touring the town. Matthew introduced her to Mr. Porter at the general store, Mrs. Miller at the bakery, and Dr. Thomas, who served as Hamilton's physician and occasionally gave health lectures at the school. Everyone greeted Matthew with genuine respect and welcomed Virginia with varying degrees of curiosity and warmth. At the general store, Virginia purchased cleaning supplies for the cottage, insisting on paying despite Matthew's offer. "You've done more than enough," she told him firmly. "I can manage from here." A flicker of something disappointment, amusement, crossed his features before he nodded acceptance. Independence is a quality worth preserving. Just remember that out here. Accepting help when needed isn't weakness, it's common sense. They parted ways at the cottage, with Matthew promising to return with her trunk. Virginia spent the next few hours cleaning her new home, scrubbing away dust and making mental notes of what she would need to make the space comfortable. The physical labor was therapeutic, giving her time to process the whirlwind changes in her circumstances. By late afternoon, the cottage was transformed. Sunlight streamed through freshly washed windows, and the scent of lemon oil replaced the musty odor that had greeted her initially. Virginia had just put on water to boil for tea when a knock at the door announced Matthew's return. He stood on her small porch, her trunk at his feet and a cloth-wrapped bundle in his arms. "As promised," he said, nodding to the trunk. "And Sarah insisted I bring you some provisions, bread, preserves, and a bit of ham to tide you over until you can properly stock your pantry." "Your sister is too kind," Virginia said, genuinely touched by the thoughtfulness. "Please thank her for me." "You can thank her yourself. She's invited you to Sunday dinner at the ranch." Matthew lifted the trunk as if it weighed nothing, carrying it inside to the spot Virginia indicated. "She's also sending over some extra curtains and linens tomorrow. Said no home feels right without proper window dressings." Virginia set the food bundle on her small table. "I don't know how to repay such generosity." "No repayment necessary. It's what neighbors do." Matthew paused, looking around the cottage with approval. "You've worked wonders in just a few hours." "It will be a comfortable home," Virginia said, surprising herself with how much she already meant it. "Would you care for tea? The water should be hot by now." The invitation was impulsive and perhaps improper, a single woman entertaining a man alone, but Hamilton wasn't Boston, and Matthew had proved himself a gentleman. He hesitated briefly before accepting. "Thank you. I should get back to the ranch before dark, but tea would be welcome." As Virginia prepared the tea, she became acutely aware of how Matthew's presence filled the small space. He wasn't an overly large man, but his vitality and quiet confidence seemed to expand beyond his physical form. It was disconcerting yet not unpleasant. They sat at her small table, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows through the windows. Virginia found herself sharing stories of her teaching experiences in Boston, while Matthew spoke of ranch life and the challenges and satisfactions it brought. "What about your family?" he asked eventually. "You mentioned your cousin, but no one else. Do they remain in Boston?" Virginia's hands tightened momentarily around her teacup. "My parents are deceased. Father 3 years ago, mother shortly after. I have no siblings." Matthew's expression softened with genuine sympathy. "I'm sorry for your loss. It's never easy, no matter the circumstances." "No, it isn't." Virginia didn't elaborate on how her father's failed investments and subsequent illness had depleted the family's resources, leaving her mother broken by grief and Virginia to fend for herself. Nor did she mention Edward Blackwell, whose betrayal had been the final push sending her west. Sensing her reluctance to discuss the matter further, Matthew changed the subject. "The school year begins soon. How many students can you expect?" Mayor Wilson mentioned about 20 children of various ages. "Is that accurate?" "Thereabouts. Hamilton's growing, though. You might see more as families settle here." Matthew finished his tea and rose. "I should take my leave. You've had a long day and there's much to do tomorrow." At the door, he paused. "If you need anything at all, the Circle J is always open to you, Miss Gardner." "You've done so much already," Virginia said softly. I don't know how to thank you properly. Seeing you settled is thanks enough." His smile warmed his eyes. "Hamilton's gained a fine teacher, and I suspect the children are in for quite an education." After he departed, Virginia stood in the doorway watching his retreating figure. Matthew Jenkins was unlike any man she'd encountered before, straightforward yet perceptive, strong yet gentle. She reminded herself that his kindness was likely extended to anyone in need. There was nothing special in his treatment of her. Still, as she prepared for her first night in her new home, Virginia found herself thinking of blue eyes that seemed to see beyond her careful facade, and wondering what they truly saw there. The days that followed took on a rhythm as Virginia prepared for the school term. Each morning she rose early, still adjusting to frontier hours, and worked on making the cottage truly hers. Sarah's promised curtains and linens arrived, along with an invitation to Sunday dinner that Virginia gratefully accepted. The school board meeting went exactly as Mayor Wilson had predicted. Her appointment was approved unanimously, with Sarah Jenkins Campbell providing a glowing endorsement of her qualifications. Virginia found herself the official teacher of Hamilton with a contract for the school year. She spent hours in the schoolhouse, cleaning and organizing, reviewing the limited textbooks available, and creating lesson plans for students of varying ages and abilities. It was work she loved, and it kept her mind occupied, preventing her from dwelling too much on the past or on a certain blue-eyed rancher who had begun to feature prominently in her thoughts. Matthew appeared occasionally in town, always making time to check on her progress. His visits were brief, but brightened her days in a way that Virginia found both comforting and unsettling. She'd sworn off romantic entanglements after Edward's betrayal, yet she couldn't deny the flutter of anticipation she felt whenever Matthew's tall figure appeared at her door. Sunday dinner at the Circle J introduced Virginia to David Campbell, Sarah's husband, a good-natured man with a ready laugh and obvious devotion to his wife. The meal was lively, with conversation flowing easily among the four of them. Virginia found herself relaxing, sharing anecdotes from her teaching days that had the others laughing heartily. "You have a gift for storytelling, Miss Gardner," David remarked. "I can see why you're a teacher. Please call me Virginia, and thank you. I believe education should engage as well as inform." "Well, Virginia," Sarah said, "we're delighted you've joined our community. It's not often we get such cultured company, is it, Matt?" Matthew, who had been quietly observing the conversation, smiled. "It certainly raises the tone of our dinner table discussions." "Don't let them fool you," David told Virginia with a wink. "Sarah reads more books than anyone I know, and Matt here could have been a lawyer or politician if ranching hadn't gotten into his blood." "David exaggerates," Matthew protested, though Virginia detected a hint of pleased embarrassment in his expression. "I'm just a simple cattleman." "There's nothing simple about you, brother dear," Sarah countered affectionately. "Virginia, did you know Matt attended 2 years of university in California before returning to take over the ranch after our father fell ill?" This revelation surprised Virginia. "I didn't." "What did you study, Mr. Jenkins?" "Matthew, please." "And it was literature and history primarily." He shrugged as if dismissing the accomplishment. "Practical knowledge for a rancher, as you can imagine." "Knowledge is never wasted," Virginia said, finding herself even more intrigued by this complex man who seemed equally at home discussing cattle breeding and classical literature. After dinner, while Sarah and David cleared the dishes despite Virginia's offers to help, Matthew suggested a walk to enjoy the late summer evening. They strolled toward a small rise that overlooked the ranch, the setting sun painting the landscape in brilliant hues of orange and purple. "Your sister and brother-in-law seem very happy," Virginia observed as they paused to admire the view. They are. They complement each other well. Matthew's gaze was distant. It's a rare thing, finding someone who accepts you completely, flaws and all. Yes, it is, Virginia agreed softly, thinking of her own failed attempt at love. Some would say it's merely a romantic notion, not meant for the real world. Matthew turned to look at her directly. You don't believe that? It wasn't a question, but Virginia answered anyway. I used to believe in perfect unions. Now I'm not so certain. Someone hurt you. Again, not a question, but a statement delivered with such quiet certainty that Virginia couldn't deny it. Yes. The admission was barely audible, badly enough that I came west to escape the aftermath. Matthew didn't press for details, a consideration that Virginia appreciated deeply. Instead, he gazed back out at the horizon. Nevada has a way of healing wounds if you give it time. The land doesn't care about your past, only how you face each new day. Is that why you returned from university? To face each day on your own terms. His smile was tinged with remembrance. Partly. I missed the openness, the honesty of the work. But mostly I came back because family matters more than personal ambition. My father needed me, and then after he passed, Sarah needed me to keep the ranch going until David came along. You're a good brother, Virginia said, struck by his selflessness. I try to be. Family's the one thing that can't be replaced. He turned toward her again. But what about you? You've built a new life here remarkably quickly. Most newcomers take months to find their footing. Virginia considered her response carefully. Necessity is a powerful motivator, and perhaps I was ready for change, eager for it, even. Change can be frightening. So can stagnation. Virginia hadn't meant to sound so vehement, but the words emerged with unexpected force. Sometimes remaining where you are, with who you are, becomes impossible. Matthew studied her face with such intensity that Virginia felt exposed, as if he could see every hurt, every fear she'd brought with her from Boston. You're a brave woman, Virginia Gardner, he said finally. Braver than many men I've known. The compliment warmed her more than it should have. I'm merely practical. No, Matthew shook his head. There's nothing mere about you. The words hung between them, charged with meaning that Virginia wasn't ready to acknowledge. She turned back toward the house, breaking the moment. We should return. Sarah will wonder what's become of us. Matthew didn't argue, falling into step beside her. But something had shifted between them during that brief exchange, an understanding, perhaps, or the beginning of one. As August waned, Virginia became increasingly integrated into Hamilton's community. She met parents of future students, attended church services, and established a routine that included regular visits to the Circle J for Sunday dinners. Her friendship with Sarah deepened, providing the female companionship she'd missed since leaving Boston. Her relationship with Matthew remained harder to define. He continued to appear in town every few days, often with practical gifts, a repaired chair for her cottage, fresh produce from the ranch garden, a book of poetry he thought she might enjoy. Each offering was presented casually, as if it were the most natural thing in the world for him to consider her needs and preferences. Virginia told herself his attention was merely neighborly kindness, but her heart recognized it as something more. The realization both thrilled and terrified her. After Edward's betrayal, she'd promised herself never again to be vulnerable to a man's charm. Yet Matthew's appeal lay not in practiced gallantry, but in his fundamental decency and quiet strength. A week before school was to begin, Virginia was arranging her classroom when the door opened to admit a woman she hadn't met before. Tall and strikingly beautiful, with golden hair and fashionable attire that seemed out of place in Hamilton, The stranger surveyed the schoolroom with obvious curiosity. "You must be the new teacher," she said, her voice carrying the refined accent of the East. "I'm Rebecca Harrington. My father owns the bank. Virginia Gardner. It's a pleasure to meet you." Virginia extended her hand, noting the expensive rings adorning Rebecca's fingers. "Are you a parent of one of my future students?" Rebecca laughed, the sound musical but somehow lacking warmth. "Heavens, no. I've only just returned to Hamilton after spending the season in San Francisco. I came to satisfy my curiosity about the Boston lady everyone's talking about." Something in her tone put Virginia on edge. "I wasn't aware I was a topic of conversation. A cultured Eastern lady appearing suddenly in our little town. Of course people are curious." Rebecca idly touched one of the textbooks on Virginia's desk. "Especially given your friendship with Matthew Jenkins." The emphasis she placed on friendship carried insinuations that made Virginia's cheeks warm. "Mr. Jenkins kindly assisted me when I first arrived. His sister sits on the school board. Yes, Sarah's a dear, but Matt." Rebecca's smile turned knowing. "He's quite the catch in these parts. Half the eligible women in the county have set their caps for him, myself included." The casual admission startled Virginia. "I see. Do you? Matt and I have an understanding, you know. Nothing official yet, but it's been expected for some time. Our families have adjacent properties and a merger would benefit everyone." Rebecca's expression remained pleasant, but her eyes had hardened. "I just thought you should know to avoid any misconceptions." Before Virginia could formulate a response, the schoolhouse door opened again and Matthew himself appeared. He stopped short at the sight of the two women. "Rebecca, I didn't know you were back in town." His tone was polite but noticeably cooler than usual. "Just yesterday, darling. I was telling Miss Gardner here about our arrangement." Rebecca crossed to him, placing a familiar hand on his arm. "You've been neglecting me, Matt. Father says you haven't been by the house once since I've been gone." Matthew gently but firmly removed her hand. "There's been no neglect, Rebecca, because there's no arrangement. I've told you before that I value our family's friendship, but that's all it is." Rebecca's composure slipped momentarily, revealing a flash of anger. "You know our fathers have always hoped. Hope isn't a contract," Matthew interrupted, his voice firm but not unkind. "Now, if you'll excuse us, I came to speak with Miss Gardner about the school bell that needs repairing." Dismissed, Rebecca gathered her dignity around her like a cloak. "Of course, school matters are so important. Miss Gardner, it was enlightening to meet you. I'm sure we'll see each other again." With that, she swept out of the schoolhouse, leaving a charged silence in her wake. "I apologize for that," Matthew said after a moment. "Rebecca tends to elaborate on reality to suit her preferences." Virginia busied herself straightening books that didn't need straightening. "There's no need to apologize. Miss Harrington was merely marking her territory." Matthew's eyebrows rose. "Her territory? You?" The word emerged more sharply than Virginia intended. "She made it quite clear that you're spoken for, regardless of your apparent unawareness of the fact." A slow smile spread across Matthew's face. "Are you jealous, Miss Gardner?" "Don't be absurd," Virginia retorted, flustered by his directness. "I merely dislike being misled." "I've never misled you," Matthew said, his smile fading to seriousness. "Rebecca and I are not courting, nor have we ever been. Her father and mine were friends, and there may have been some paternal matchmaking attempts over the years, but I've never encouraged her interest." Virginia wanted to believe him, but Edward's smooth lies had taught her caution. "It's really none of my business, Mr. Jenkins." "Matt," he corrected gently. "And I believe it is your business, Virginia, because I've come to care for you a great deal and I'd like to court you properly if you'll allow it." The declaration, delivered with such straightforward sincerity, left Virginia momentarily speechless. Part of her, the part that still believed in possibility, soared at his words, but the wounded, wary part that had fled Boston urged caution. "You hardly know me," she said at last. "I know enough. I know you're intelligent, determined, and brave. I know you love teaching and have a gift for it. I know you came west for reasons you're not ready to share, and that you've been hurt by someone who didn't deserve your trust." Matthew stepped closer, his blue eyes intent on hers. "The rest I hope to discover over time, if you'll give me that chance." Virginia's heart raced. I'm not sure I'm ready for this. I'm not asking for promises, just permission to call on you to see where this might lead." His smile returned, gentle and unassuming. "I'm a patient man, Virginia." She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw nothing of Edward's calculating charm or practiced seduction. Matthew Jenkins was offering himself honestly, with no games or hidden agenda. "All right," she heard herself say. "You may call on me." The joy that lit his features was worth the risk she'd just taken. "Thank you. I'll do my best not to make you regret it." As he departed, having never actually mentioned the school bell that was his supposed reason for visiting, Virginia leaned against her desk, wondering if she'd just made the wisest or most foolish decision of her life. Either way, she couldn't deny the lightness in her heart, a feeling of possibility she hadn't experienced in far too long. The first day of school arrived with all the excitement and nervous energy Virginia remembered from her teaching days in Boston. 22 students ranging in age from 6 to 16 filed into the schoolhouse, eyeing their new teacher with varying degrees of curiosity, apprehension, and in the case of a few older boys, skepticism. Virginia met each gaze with confidence, having prepared meticulously for this moment. Her navy blue dress was simple but elegant, her hair arranged in a practical but becoming style, and her voice firm and clear as she introduced herself. "Good morning, students. I am Miss Gardner, and I will be your teacher this term. In this classroom, we will learn together, challenge ourselves, and treat each other with respect. I expect your best effort, and in return, I promise to give you mine." By day's end, Virginia had assessed her students' abilities, established classroom rules, and begun to memorize names and personalities. There were bright spots: Alice Miller's quick mind, Thomas Wilson's eager participation and challenges, the Sullivan twins' mischievous tendencies, William Harrington's sullen resistance to female authority. As she dismissed the class, reminding them of tomorrow's assignments, Virginia felt a profound satisfaction. This was what she loved, what she was meant to do. The complexities of her personal life, her growing feelings for Matthew, her still unshared past receded in the face of this simple truth. Here, in this classroom, she knew exactly who she was and what was required of her. Matthew was waiting when she emerged from the schoolhouse, leaning against a hitching post with an air of patient anticipation. Several mothers collecting younger children exchanged knowing glances at the sight of the eligible rancher clearly waiting for the teacher. "Successful first day?" he asked as she approached. "I believe so. It will take time to adapt the curriculum to their varied needs, but they seem eager to learn for the most part." Virginia was aware of curious eyes watching them, but found she didn't mind. Hamilton would talk regardless, better to give them something wholesome to discuss. "I thought you might like to celebrate with dinner at the hotel restaurant," Matthew suggested. "They do a fine steak on Mondays." The offer was tempting, but Virginia shook her head. "Thank you, but I should prepare for tomorrow. First impressions matter, and I want to build on today's momentum." If Matthew was disappointed, he hid it well. "Another time, then. But at least let me walk you home. I brought something for your cottage." Curious, Virginia allowed him to escort her to the small house behind the school. On her porch sat a wooden rocking chair, its design simple but elegant, the wood polished to a warm glow. "You made this?" she asked, running her hand along the smooth armrest. "During the evenings last week." Every home needs a comfortable place to sit after a long day. Matthew watched her expression carefully. "Do you like it?" "It's beautiful," Virginia said truthfully, deeply touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "But you shouldn't have gone to such trouble." "It wasn't trouble. It was a pleasure." Matthew's smile held a hint of shyness that Virginia found endearing. "I enjoy working with my hands, creating something lasting." On impulse, Virginia invited him in for tea. As they sat in her small parlor, discussing her first day of teaching, she realized how comfortable she felt in his presence. There was none of the nervous tension she'd experienced with Edward, always worried about saying or doing the wrong thing. With Matthew, conversation flowed naturally. Silences were companionable rather than awkward, and laughter came easily. When he departed an hour later, declining her invitation to stay for a simple supper, Virginia stood in her doorway watching him walk away, aware of a growing certainty that Matthew Jenkins was becoming essential to her happiness in a way that both thrilled and frightened her. The weeks that followed established a pattern. Virginia threw herself into teaching, discovering talents and potential in her students that sometimes surprised even their parents. Matthew called on her regularly, sometimes for planned outings, a community harvest dance, Sunday services followed by dinner at the Circle J, and sometimes just appearing at her cottage with fresh flowers or a book he thought she might enjoy. Their courtship progressed slowly, respectfully. Matthew never pressed for more than Virginia seemed ready to give, content with conversation and the occasional touch of hands. His patience only increased her growing affection for him. October brought cooler weather and the first hints of the harsh winter to come. Virginia's students presented a harvest pageant for the town, earning her the approval of even the most skeptical parents. Her position in the community felt secure, her life more settled than it had been in years. Only one shadow marred her contentment, the secret she still kept about her past in Boston. As her feelings for Matthew deepened, the burden of this concealment weighed more heavily. He deserved to know the truth about Edward Blackwell and the scandal that had driven her west, yet each time she resolved to tell him, fear held her back. What if the revelation changed how he saw her? What if the warmth in his blue eyes turned to disgust or, worse, pity? The opportunity, or perhaps the necessity for truth, came unexpectedly on a crisp Saturday afternoon. Virginia had walked to the general store for supplies when she overheard a conversation between Rebecca Harrington and another woman. "A letter from my cousin in Boston," Rebecca was saying. She mentioned a scandal involving a teacher named Gardner. Apparently, she was engaged to a prominent businessman who discovered she'd been. Virginia's heart stopped. Moving on instinct, she abandoned her shopping and hurried back to her cottage, panic rising in her throat. If Rebecca had indeed received such information, it was only a matter of time before the story spread throughout Hamilton. Her carefully constructed new life would crumble, just as it had in Boston. She was packing essential items, mind racing with contingency plans when a knock at her door startled her. Matthew stood on her porch, his expression concerned. "Virginia, Mrs. Porter said you left the store in a hurry. Are you all right?" She couldn't face him, not now. "I'm fine. Just remembered an urgent matter." Matthew's gaze moved past her to the partially packed carpetbag on her table. His expression shifted from concern to alarm. "You're leaving?" The lie died on her lips. She couldn't deceive him, not anymore. "Please come in. There's something I need to tell you." Once inside, Virginia paced her small parlor, unable to remain still. Matthew waited silently, his steady presence both reassuring and terrifying given what she was about to reveal. "I wasn't entirely truthful about why I left Boston," she began finally. "I told you I wanted a fresh start, which is true, but not the whole truth." Matthew didn't interrupt, his blue eyes following her movements with unwavering attention. "I was engaged to a man named Edward Blackwell. He was charming, well-connected, and seemed to adore me. After my parents died, he offered security and companionship when I was most vulnerable." Virginia's hands trembled as the memories flooded back. "What I didn't know was that he was deeply in debt and saw my modest inheritance as a solution to his financial problems." She touched the faint scar along her jawline. "When I discovered his deception and confronted him, Edward became violent. This was his parting gift." Her finger traced the thin line. "He told everyone I had fabricated the engagement to trap him, that I was unstable and dangerous. In Boston society, his word as a man and a Blackwell carried more weight than mine." Virginia finally met Matthew's gaze directly. "I lost my teaching position. Former friends crossed the street to avoid me. I became a cautionary tale of female delusion. So I came west, where no one knew my name or my shame." Her voice broke slightly. "Until now. Rebecca Harrington has received a letter from Boston. The story is about to repeat itself here." Throughout her confession, Matthew's expression had remained unreadable. Now he rose from his chair and Virginia braced herself for his withdrawal, his disgust, his departure. Instead, he crossed to her and gently took her hands in his. "Thank you for telling me." The simple response, devoid of judgment or pity, undid her. Tears she'd held back for months spilled down her cheeks. "Aren't you going to ask if it's true? If I really did invent an engagement to trap a wealthy man?" "No," Matthew said firmly, "because I know you. Whatever happened in Boston, whatever lies this man told, they don't change who you are, the woman I've come to know and care for deeply. But the town, Hamilton, isn't Boston." Matthew's voice was gentle but resolute. "And Rebecca Harrington isn't the final authority on anyone's character. The people here have seen you teach their children, contribute to their community. They know you, Virginia, the real you." She wanted desperately to believe him, but fear still gripped her heart. "You don't understand. Once the whispers start, they never stop. I'll be that woman again, the delusional spinster, the cautionary tale. Not if we face this together." Matthew's hands tightened around hers. Unless you don't want that. Unless you don't feel for me what I feel for you." The vulnerability in his question cut through Virginia's panic. Here was this strong, good man, offering not just support but his heart, asking if she reciprocated his feelings. The answer came without hesitation. "I do," she whispered. "I've tried to protect myself, but I can't deny it anymore. I care for you deeply, Matt. But I'm afraid my past will taint your reputation as well." The smile that lit Matthew's face was like sunrise breaking over the Nevada mountains. "Let it. Some things are worth risking everything for." He raised a hand to gently touch her cheek. "You are worth it, Virginia Gardner. Every risk, every challenge." For the first time, he leaned down and kissed her, a gentle, questioning touch that deepened when she responded. It was nothing like Edward's calculated embraces. Matthew kissed her with reverence and genuine affection that made her heart swell with hope and possibility. When they parted, Virginia felt a curious sense of peace. Whatever came next, she would face it with this extraordinary man beside her. "No more running," she promised, both to him and herself. "Whatever Rebecca says, whatever rumors spread, I'll stay and face them." "We'll face them," Matthew corrected. "Together." The rumors did indeed begin to circulate. though in a form distorted by distance and Rebecca's own embellishments. Virginia endured curious glances and a few withdrawn invitations, but the catastrophe she'd feared didn't materialize. Mayor Wilson expressed complete confidence in her abilities as a teacher. Sarah and David Campbell made a point of publicly supporting her, and Matthew remained steadfastly at her side, his courtship now open and undisguised. Most surprisingly, several women of the town, including Mrs. Porter from the general store and Dr. Thomas's wife, visited Virginia to share their own stories of men like Edward Blackwell, men who abused trust and power, then blamed their victims. Their solidarity moved Virginia deeply and helped heal wounds she'd thought would never close. As winter descended on Hamilton, Virginia found herself more securely established than ever. Her students were thriving, her position in the community was respected, and her relationship with Matthew had deepened into a love more profound than anything she'd experienced before. It was Christmas Eve when Matthew asked Virginia to marry him. They had attended the community celebration at the town hall, enjoyed the children's pageant, and shared a festive supper with friends. Afterward, he escorted her home through gently falling snow, the world quiet and magical around them. On her porch, beneath a sprig of mistletoe that Sarah had insisted on hanging, Matthew took both her hands in his. "Virginia Gardner, you came to Nevada looking for a new beginning. I came back from university seeking purpose. We both found something we weren't looking for each other." He drew a small box from his coat pocket. "I love your mind, your courage, your heart. I love the way you challenge me and support me. I love watching you with your students, seeing the difference you make in their lives." Opening the box, he revealed a simple but elegant ring with a small diamond. "This was my mother's. I would be honored if you would wear it as my wife." Virginia looked at the man before her, steady, honorable, loving, and felt the final walls around her heart dissolve. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and certain. "Nothing would make me happier." Matthew slipped the ring onto her finger, then kissed her with a passion that promised a lifetime of devotion. When they separated, breathless and laughing, snow dusting their hair and shoulders, Virginia felt a sense of homecoming she'd never experienced before. "I'm not beautiful," she whispered, suddenly vulnerable, the memory of Edward's cruel assessments surfacing unexpectedly. "Not like Rebecca or the other women who have sought your attention." Matthew cradled her face in his hands, his blue eyes intense with sincerity. "Then I'll look till you believe you are," he promised. "Every day for the rest of our lives, I'll show you how beautiful you are to me, not just your face or form, but your spirit, your courage, your heart." And in that moment, standing in the snow with the man who loved her completely, Virginia began to believe it might be true. Their wedding took place the following spring, when the Nevada landscape erupted in wildflowers that rivaled any cultivated garden. The entire town of Hamilton attended, even Rebecca Harrington, who had eventually found a wealthy mining engineer more suited to her ambitions. Virginia wore a gown of ivory silk that Sarah had helped her make, with violets in her hair and Matthew's mother's pearls around her neck. They established their home at the Circle J, expanding the ranch house to accommodate their growing family. Virginia continued teaching for several years, eventually training a successor when their twin sons, and later a daughter, demanded more of her attention. Matthew's careful stewardship made the ranch prosperous, allowing him to pursue his love of literature by building an impressive library that became a resource for the entire community. As the years passed, Virginia sometimes marveled at the journey that had brought her from heartbreak in Boston to profound happiness in Nevada. The scar on her jawline faded until it was barely visible, much like the painful memories it represented. What remained vibrant and ever-growing was the love between her and Matthew, a love founded on truth, respect, and unwavering support. True to his promise, he never stopped showing her the beauty he saw in her, until eventually she came to see it clearly herself. On their 20th anniversary, as they sat on the porch of their home watching their children and the hired hands bring in the last of the day's work, Virginia turned to her husband, her hazel eyes bright with contentment. "Thank you," she said simply. Matthew took her hand, the same gentle strength in his touch as when he'd first helped her down from the stagecoach all those years ago. "For what?" "For looking until I believed." He smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening, lines earned through years of laughter and occasional sorrow, through challenges faced and overcome together. "That was easy," he told her. "The beauty was always there. You just needed someone who knew how to see it." And as the sun set over their Nevada home, painting the land in the same golden hues that had greeted Virginia on her first day in Hamilton, she knew with absolute certainty that she had found not just a new beginning, but a love story that would endure far beyond their lifetimes, a legacy of courage, truth, and unwavering belief in the beauty of being truly seen and completely loved.